Welcome, my dear students, to Standard 10 class Science and Technology Part 2. We begin with the 10th lesson, Disaster Management. In this lesson, we will cover disaster, types of disaster, effect or impact of disaster, disaster management, the nature and extent of disaster, first aid and emergency action, mock drill. Disaster. Various dangerous events occur many times in the environment. Those are called as disasters. Some of the main natural disasters are floods, wet and dry famine, cyclones, earthquakes, volcanoes, etc. These are all of a sudden troubles to the mankind. Such events cause sudden changes in the environment and thereby cause the damage to it. Environment is also damaged due to these natural resources for development. This leads to sudden disasters unexpected to human. These can be man-made disasters. United Nations has defined a disaster as the sudden event that leads to the huge loss of life and property. Words like huge and sudden are important in the definition, as the loss in the property occurs in the area of disaster. There are long-term effects on society due to incidences of life and property loss. Various areas of life like economic, social, cultural, political, law and administration, etc. are affected by it. The life in the area of disaster disturbs totally. There is loss of life and property of the people in distress. Earlier, we have studied various types of disasters and the measures to be taken. None of the different disasters are similar. Period of each disaster is not the same. Some disasters are short term, whereas some are long term. Reasons behind each disaster are also different. Depending upon the nature of disaster, it can be determined that which component of the environment will be affected more. Earlier, we have studied the effects of various types of disasters and the precautionary measures to be taken in case of any disaster happens. We can classify the disasters in other two ways, like catastrophic disasters, for example, cyclones in Odisha, catastrophic earthquakes of Gujarat and Latur, frequently buzzing cyclones in coastal Andhra Pradesh, etc., which leads to total chaos, huge loss of life and property in respective region. However, irrespective of all these, life has always returned to normal within short time. Disasters making the impact for long duration are those whose after effects are either severe or severity increases with time. For example, famine, various problems of crop, strikes of workers, rising levels of oceans, desertification, etc. Types of disasters: geological, for example, earthquake, volcano, tsunami, landslides, landfall, erosion, alkalization, flooding, etc. Atmospheric in geophysical, example, hot and cold waves, snowstorms, snowfall, cyclones, hailstorms, drought, flood, meteorite, sunspots, etc. Biological, in that we have plant, for example, forest fire, fungal disease spreading, blister, weed, that is aquatic carrot grass, common grass. In animal we have infectious viruses, bacteria, cholera, malaria, hepatitis, plague, insects, bite of poisonous animals, etc. In case of man-made, unknown, that is poisonous gases, atomic test, unplanned action, accident, international, war, fire, bomb blast, forced migration, terrorism, rapes, child labor, etc. Effects of disaster. We have understood the serious effects of disaster with the help of above mentioned questions. Collapsing of bridges, flooding of coastal villages, shortage of food are some problems of floods. Collapsing of houses, developing cracks in land are some of the effects of earthquakes. Disasters like forest fire and drought are adversely affecting the environment. However, what is exact nature of the disasters and whether there are any changes in nature before the occurrence of disasters and how long the effects occur after the occurrence of disaster and how it needs to be thought over on all these aspects. This helps us to understand the nature and gravity of the disaster. Disasters definitely affect the economic of the nation. That is, the economic condition of the nation is being affected. That effect is always relative to disaster and economy. That is, if any part is destroyed, there are long lasting effects on economic due to huge expenses in the reconstruction. An effect of disaster on social leadership is that the local leadership is not strong enough, citizens become confused. It affects their participation in rescue and rehabilitation activities. Administrative problems arise due to disaster. If local governing bodies are affected by disasters, related departments cannot answer the problems of disaster efficiently. All the concerned departments are affected by disaster and thereby the entire system collapses. Nature and scope of disaster. Taking into consideration the scope of disaster, some of the important facts must be thought over as follows. Pre-disaster phase, warning phase, emergency phase, rehabilitation phase, recovery phase, reconstruction phase. Taking into consideration the nature and scope of disaster, only three aspects of disaster are important for common citizens. First phase, that is phase of emergency. Important character of this phase is that maximum lives can be saved by quick actions during this phase only. Various actions like search and rescue operations, medical assistance, first aid, restoring communication services, removing the people from affected area are expected at this phase. Gravity of disaster can be estimated in this phase only. Second phase, that is the transitional phase. Rehabilitation work is started in this phase after the subsidence of any type of disaster. It includes clearing of debris, restoring water supply, repairing roads, etc., so that it will help to bring normalcy in public people. Rehabilitation of the victims is important aspect of this transitional phase. Generally, different institutes offer the monetary and other type of help to such people. It helps to soothe the mental stress at the earliest of these victims and are offered with the permanent mean of early livelihood, and this is true rehabilitation. Reconstruction phase. This is highly complicated phase. This phase begins in transition phase. People reconstruct their buildings and facilities like roads and water supply are restored. Farming practices are restarted. However, it takes long time for reconstruction. Planet Earth has experienced many natural disasters. Listening to the description of those disasters bring numbness to the mind. Most of the disasters and related pre-expected situations have been occurred in the ancient continent and region of Pacific Ocean. Huge loss of the life and planet Earth has been occurred due to such disasters. Generally, such conditions of natural imbalance have been arisen due to greed of economic progress of human beings. In reality, old problems of several years have become fierce. For example, increasing population, its increasing needs of emergency problems, out of which now at the extreme end they are reached. Such disasters have been increased after the World War II. Conditions of instability arises in the country due to various reasons like economic inequality, racial and religious differences, etc. Incidences like terrorism, abduction, social differences have been a routine now. Production and use of harmful chemicals is under the developed countries, that is, they have banned in the developed countries. However, production of either same or those chemicals which can wipe out the human race is common in developing and poor countries. Another such threat to human beings is from the atomic energy plants. For example, radiation leakage occurs after a bomb blast in atomic energy plant at Chernobyl, Russia. Its ill effects are still experienced in the region. This atomic energy plant was only used for electricity generation. Nowadays, many countries are equipped with atomic energy. Out of this, risk of radiation leakage is increasing due to carelessness. Hence, importance of disaster management has become the foremost need of almost all the nations. In fact, it is the most necessary for citizens of all the countries because all the main sufferers of such type of disaster are the citizens. Hence, direct participation of citizens in disaster management is highly necessary. Similarly, disaster management schemes should be changed with respect to local time and nature of the disaster. It should not be restricted for a particular period. Overall, there may be any type of disaster, it can be overcome. Concept of disaster management has been arisen out of this only. Disaster management. Disaster may be minor or major, short time or long time. It should be overcome and effective disaster management is necessary for it. There is close relationship between disaster management and public participation. Disaster management is either prevention of disasters or making arrangements to face it or at least achieve the abilities to face it. Disaster is very fast process. In fact, it is an accident. What shall we do in such situation? How can we protect ourselves and our belongings and animals from it? In case of disaster management, there should be an attempt to minimize the losses. Disasters are never planned, but losses due to it can be prevented in a planned manner. Disaster management is achieving or time to time improving the ability to face the disasters through scientific and careful observations and analysis of the data. For example, preparation of the action plan through study of various aspects like preventive measures, rehabilitation and reconstruction, and executing that plan is nothing but the management of disaster. Disaster management is divided into two parts: pre-disaster management and post-disaster management. Pre-disaster management includes the complete preparation and planning to face any type of disaster. For that purpose, identifying the pro-disaster areas, collecting the information about intensity of disaster and probable sites of disasters through predictive intensity maps and hazard maps respectively, getting special training for disaster management, increasing awareness about disaster management among the general public through training programs, mass media, etc., post disaster management provides all types of necessary help to victims of disasters. Participation of preferably local peoples saved from the disaster in arranging the help to victims. Quick establishment of help center. Different types of disasters need different types of control centers. Categorization of the help material received from control center, delivering the material to victims, and continuous review of the help. Being always prepared for disaster rescue. Disaster cycle preparation. Plan is prepared to minimize the destruction of any type of disaster if occurs. Redemption. Plan for minimizing the damage to the society and the country. Preparedness. A plan is chalked out so as to get the quick response from general public and administration. Impact of disaster. Intensity of various aspects of disaster and disaster management are reviewed. Response. Response to the disaster is to be given immediately after the incidents. This factor is followed by the disaster strike in this cycle. Resurgence. Resurgence is an important link between emergency measures and national progress. Resurrection is a stage used for welfare and rehabilitation of the nation. Restoration. This is an important link between measures after disaster and national development. This step is useful for the progress of the nation and rehabilitation. They are the main aspects of disaster management cycle. Structure of Disaster Management Authority. District Disaster Management Authority. At the district level, district collector is responsible for disaster management and implementation of rehabilitation schemes. Collector is planning, coordinating and controlling the implementation of rehabilitation program, gives out necessary instructions and reviews the entire system. District collector is also responsible for designing the schemes for each district separately for each type of disaster and getting those sanctioned from the state level authorities. District wise disaster control unit. District control unit is established immediately either after the impact of disaster or getting intimation about it. It reviews about various aspects of disaster, keeps continuous contact with various agencies like Army, Air Force, Navy, Telecommunication Department, paramilitary forces, etc. for getting help. It is also responsible for coordinating with various voluntary organizations for their help in disaster management. First aid and emergency action. Sometimes we have to face the disaster due to our own unawareness. Some symbols given beside are seen, used around us. Those symbols can be ignored. Such symbols are useful to avoid the mishaps. There are some disasters given in the picture, for example, earthquake, snake bite, etc. Various activities are shown in the pictures. In emergency condition, various transportation methods like cradle method, carrying on back, carrying on two hands are to be followed. Those methods depend upon the condition of the victim. We face different types of major or minor disasters in our daily life. Varieties of disasters like accidents, stampede, injuries in fighting, electric shock, burns, heat shock, snake bite, dog bite, fire due to electric short circuit, epidemic of any disease, etc. happen around us. Victims of disaster need to be offered some primary help before actual medical treatment. First aid is useful in such circumstances. First aid kit. It is essential to have material necessary for first aid with us. That material is available in the first aid kit. You can also prepare a first aid kit. It is important to use whatever material available in the given condition for first aid. For example, bandage strips of different size, wound gauze, triangular and circular bandage, medicated cotton, hand gloves, clean and dry cloth pieces, soap, antiseptic that is Dettol or Savlon, safety pins, blade, small pins, needle, band-aid, torch, scissors, thermometer, petroleum jelly, etc. Mock drill. It is a practice to check the preparedness of facing the disaster as early as possible. Virtual apparent situation of disaster is created to check the reaction time for any type of disaster. Trained personnel observe their responsibilities to check execution of plan designed for disaster redressal. This helps to check the efficacy of the system prepared for the disaster redressal. Mock drill is arranged on disaster of fire in various schools by the firefighters. It includes the demonstrations like extinguishing the fire, rescuing the people trapped at higher floors of buildings, rescuing the persons whose clothings have catched the fire, etc. Such situations or activities are also arranged by police force and voluntary organizations. Thank you, my dear children.